Welcome. Today is session number 3 in a series of 5 sessions on hard decisions made easy. And we have our guest again today is Paul Gordon, who's the CEO of Catalyze APAC and is an expert in working with leaders in large organisations to help them make complex decisions that stick. So before we actually start on the topic of academic rigor, which is what we're going to talk about today. I imagine working with large organisations, no doubt you've got leaders who would find there are certain obstacles that even once they know the right way to go about it, they get stopped. So what's your perspective about that?
Hi, Kylie, and great to be back. It's a common challenge, that kind of paralysis, or that I don't even know why I feel like I can't do what I need to do. I've written down a process, but why aren't I having the conversations? Why aren't I thinking about this? And I suppose one thing I'd say is overall, when I talk about structured decision making, I often talk about the idea of making things that are implicit, like unknown to us, hidden, explicit, get them out on the table. Very often the start of any kind of decision process, thinking about decision making, especially with some of these very big clients we work with, is let's get everything out there. What's actually going on might be obvious, the decision we're trying to make or the amount of money we've got to spend, but what else is going on? What's your concerns about that for you as an individual? What's the concerns for the organization? Last week we talked about things like reputational impacts, and sometimes that's one of those things that is hidden to us. Our fear of feeling stupid that we made the wrong decision, or fear of getting onto the front page of the news. And so sometimes that's undistinguished, that's not there. And often let's just have a frank conversation around what could be going on behind the scenes that's not having you want to take action in terms of this decision. And then what I'd say is let's build that practically into the process. Let's not pretend it's not there, which is of course much more tempting to do, just say, oh, don't worry, it'll go away, because of course what happens is it will rear its head at some other point. So I'd always start with let's get as much onto the table as we can, and then let's look at using the process of decision making to help us cut through some of that stuff.
Look, I don't imagine that would be easy, Paul. Especially in a work context, because I certainly know the psychological safety aspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And often people are afraid of revealing any of their underlying concerns. Is there anything you can say about what some of the easiest ways or best advice, or what have you got around that?
Yeah, I think actually, and it does talk to today's topic, because one of the things we're going to discuss and under this principle of academic rigor is the idea of something called decision modeling. The idea of a decision model is there is somewhere, let's say over there, a representation of the decision, not stuck in your head, it's not caught in your gut, it's a way of representing the decision. And the idea of having something like a decision model can help a lot of people go, it's not about me. It's about that thing over there called the decision. I can step back and look at it from afar. And as I look at it and engage with it and prod it and poke it and discuss it with other people, it's not me. So separating out from the thing we're trying to achieve here, the decision we're trying to make, from me being caught up in that and all of those fears and those unsaid things that might rear their head. So that's one of the ways that we look at it. It really allows for another way, which makes a lot of people laugh, of course, is I do a lot of work facilitating decision processes, and the first thing I'll say is, rather than argue with each other or argue with yourself, argue with me. I've got the broad shoulders. If you think this is a stupid thing to do, then tell me. And it gives people some freedom. It's the same reason, of course, why we have coaches, that they have the broad shoulders that allow us to go, just do the download and it's fine, no one's going to get hurt.
Yes.
So that's another part of the way that I'd often help people engage with some of these things that perhaps they don't want to look at, they don't want to explore. It's like, let's not make it about you personally, let's make it about the thing over there called the decision. We've got a good process, we can have some confidence it's going to proceed. And of course, ultimately, I will come back to, I've been doing this for 15 years, frankly, there's nothing I haven't seen. So much as you might like to think you're special and you've heard it all before.
I think the thing that I really like about what you just said, Paul, so firstly, there's two things, I think. One is I am reminded, again, I guess my neuroscience hat on, right, that we're switching out of the limbic brain. And when we're in the limbic part of the brain where there's the fight, flight reaction, all emotional response, it is about us and our attention's over here where we are. And that's not where the answer, in fact, is going to lie. The structure that you're referring to is something that we get when we're using the prefrontal cortex, which is that creative part of the brain, which is more strategic in thinking and more slow things down a little bit. But I'm hearing also in what you're saying is that you actually have some frameworks and models that people can then go to, which kind of has them It's almost like forcing them. It's a great way to actually get yourself into the prefrontal cortex.
Exactly right. And the fun bit about what we do in structured decision making is trying to balance all of that stuff. Because some people would argue and say, oh, if you can just get all this emotional stuff out of the way, you'll make better decisions. Let's do only things logically based entirely on the data. The numbers add up, there's your answer. That's actually no more helpful than the other way, which is forget all the data and just toss a coin in the air and go, my gut feel says here's the right answer. The secret in structured decision making is bringing all those things together in a way that makes the best of both worlds. Frequently, I will say to people, it's people that make decisions, not computers. So don't build all these wonderful computer spreadsheets and go, there's the answer. But of course, without the data supporting the people making the decisions, it just turns into basically a fight between who's got the loudest voice. So somehow we've got to balance all that.
I love that. It's about embracing both, right? So the second principle in your book is called academic rigor. So when planning your decision process, we want to ensure it's based on academically rigorous techniques.
The first thing I'll say, and I think we said it in the first episode, is that most people wouldn't even know there is a field of science called decision science. And like every other field of science, maths, physics, chemistry, whatever you want to refer to, decision science has its rules and principles and has many learned professors the world over researching into this area and so on. And so it's first thing is, let's know that there is decision science and let's use that where it can help us. And so what does decision science look at? It looks at the theory of decision making. It looks at how our brains work when we make decisions. It looks at how you can add numbers up to help you make decisions. It also looks at how you can't add numbers up to help make decisions. So the world of decision science is rich, has been around for a very long time. And just because I can, one of the things that I'm proud about is we have a strong association with the academic community. So, in fact, just last night I was on a teleconference call with one of the leading professors of decision science, a chap called Larry Phillips from the London School of Economics. So the kind of the world of academia is rich in this domain of decision science. And so why do we care about that? So this could then take a very academic twist, this podcast, and without a whiteboard or a blackboard to start chalking up some equations, I think we might be a bit stuck. So I don't want to go too far into that domain.
I think this is really valuable because I think this does help us get a little bit more practical about the application. I think the value of academia is people turning research and data and spending a lot of time in the deep world of that and being able to make sense of it so that we can actually be able to use it practically in the world. So I don't think you've got anything to worry about. And I'm pretty sure if you get too academic on me, I'll just ask you questions. How about that?
That sounds fair enough to me. And and if you look at decision science, it encompasses many different things. It encompasses neuroscience, it encompasses psychology, it encompasses economics, it encompasses statistical techniques, a whole range of things that really, and I guess this is why this is one of four principles. If we said the only way to make structured decisions is to access decision science and use scientifically proven decision methods, then many people's eyes would glaze over and go, yeah, that's all very well for the boffin heads, but frankly, for me, in the real world, give me something I can grapple with. So that's why it's one of four principles, not the... So perhaps if I start with a little bit by what do I mean by academic rigor? A decision process that observes the rules of decision science. And there are some things called the axioms of decision theory. And again, the blackboard is missing, so I'm not going to go too far into detail there. But they cover principles. For example, if I've got three things I'm considering, I prefer the first thing over the second thing, and then I prefer the second thing over the third thing, then definitely I prefer the first thing over the third thing. So there's one of our axioms of decision theory. And making sure we observe those when we build our decision process is really important. Now, it might sound blindingly obvious when I talk it through it that way, but it's actually entirely possible to conceive of decision processes that break all those rules. And probably the one I guess we want to touch on most, that I most frequently see not being observed, is around how when we make decisions, we often use numbers to support making decisions. So, for example, and we will have all done it, we've all seen these surveys that come through, we've all rated people on TripAdvisor that asks us, on a scale of 1 to 5, how great do you think the service was? Was it a 5? Was it a 3? So using numbers to represent an aspect of a decision, whether it's how good we thought something was, how much value it provided, what was it worth, was it better than this thing or worse than this thing, etc., etc. And so we've very frequently used numbers in our decision process. And the thing that, and I'll let you into a little secret here, more often than not when someone comes to me saying, oh, we have a decision process, we have these numbers, we add up, there's the answer. There's something that's wrong, that is not academically rigorous, that in fact doesn't even make mathematical sense. yet people don't realize it. And so one of my secret missions I'm on is to fix the world's broken scoring system. So
Right.
where I see that, I go, okay, I got to have at that, got to understand what's going on there. And it's unfortunately happens all over the place.
If I'm hearing what you're saying, is that when we take an approach to research, I'm always the biggest skeptic of research, I must say too, because often when we design the research or the data, the metrics that we put against that data can often be biased.
Yes.
And therefore we're putting measures in against certain things that are designed by our own biases. And therefore, when it comes to making the decision, we're actually using it off a piece of data that tells us what we knew we wanted to tell in the first place, because the way we designed the data in the first place was based off a bias.
Yes.
Am I with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, very good.
and there's and this might sound contradictory to what I've been saying, but there's also this common philosophy that you can only manage what you can measure. So therefore, we can only consider those things that we measure in our decision processes. And frankly, that's absurd, because if we only consider the things that we could measure, then most of the stuff that actually matters to us would never be taken into account. Now, when we talk about our fourth principle, we're going to touch much more on this whole idea of things you can measure versus things you can't. But really what I want to cover here under academic rigor is, if you are going to bring data into it, use it in a way that's valid and not invalid. Now, let me give you a nice simple example. And this really talks about the difference between the data, as in the numbers that we can measure, and then how it impacts our decision process. And the language I always use is, there's the data and there's how much we care about it. So easy example is, of course, price is data. So last week we talked about a new lounge, and you might say this lounge costs $1,000, and is $1,000 how much I care about the price? It depends. If you've got $1 million in your bank account, then you probably don't care about $1,000 very much. So how much you care about the $1,000 would be different from someone else who's got $500 in their bank account but really wants the couch, and they would care a lot about the $1,000. So there's a difference between the number, $1,000, and how much we care about it, depending on who you are. Same thing, another example which I like is things like time. So let's imagine you're contemplating moving house to a different suburb, and one of your considerations is how long it takes you to get to work, your commute time. Now, you might say, how much I care about my commute time is just the commute time. If I live here, it takes me 20 minutes. If I live here, it takes me an hour. If I live here, it takes me 2 hours. My question would be, is 2 hours twice as bad as 1 hour? And you might say, actually, if it's 2 hours, I'm going to be on the train. I get to listen to some amazing podcasts, of course. I get to read some books. I get to do some work. Actually, a 2-hour commute is better than a 1-hour commute, because a 1-hour commute is too much faffing around. I don't get the time to get my laptop out. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that I can't make good use of that 1 hour. So a 2-hour commute is better than a 1-hour commute. If I just took the numbers, 2 hours is twice as bad as 1 hour. So what the decision science tells us is, you've got to be really careful about where your numbers are, 2 hours versus 1 hour, and how you represent them in your decision, how much you care about them. And that's really the nub of this issue, because very frequently that's not what's happened. People says, tell me your numbers, here's the commute time. Right, you should now live at this place because 1 hour is better than 2 hours. Yet intuitively, it doesn't make sense. You've now made a decision to live in a place that you hate the commute from, when actually you could have lived further out, spent less money, got a bigger house. Oh my goodness. So, yes.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm never wrong. No, listen, just what I heard then, Paul, was really fascinating, because, in fact, we often hear, especially today, there's a lot of conversation about how organisations are focused on profit over people. And when I hear you talking about that, what I'm actually hearing is that you're addressing the area called how to ensure that we take into consideration the impacts or what's going to be of value or importance to people, because at the end of the day, people are the ones who are going to be impacted by the decision.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. And I hate keep saying, and we're going to come to that later, but under our fourth principle, we're going to talk a lot more around this concept of stuff that you can't measure, intangible stuff, what people care about versus what you can measure. But it's exactly right. And the being able to, in your decision process, deal with this measurable stuff or deal with this opinion stuff in a way that's accurate is really important. It is the reason why we said right at the beginning, if you're not using academic rigor, you could drive yourself into decisions that get overturned later or just don't feel right. And one of the reasons they don't feel right is the numbers you've used don't quite stack up. I put 2 hours in versus 1 hour. It said it's twice as bad. Therefore, I've made a decision to live in this place and I'm doing it. That doesn't feel like the right decision. And the reason that's the wrong decision is you've used the numbers in the wrong way. You haven't used an academically rigorous way of dealing with those numbers.
Okay, so then I think the easy question there is, Paul, well, how do I go about that?
That's a great question. I guess the try and find the short answer. The first answer, of course, is you get a decision expert to help you.
And you go read the book.
That's right. But I guess the short answer is, firstly, notice there is a difference between the numbers and how much you care about them. Those are two different things. And when you realize that and start to, I guess, take that into account, you can then say, here are my numbers. Here's my list of, say, commute times, rather than just add them all up or multiply them together or whatever you're going to do with them to say, there's my answer. I'm going to take another step. And another step is, let me find a different numerical way of representing how much I care about those numbers. And that is the process that we call in decision science, we call scoring. It is assigning a numerical number that represents how much something means to you.
Right.
And the trick is to, I guess the easy answer is to design a scoring scale, which might be on a scale of 0 to 10, how much do I care about my commute? And I might say, my favorite commute might be the 2 hour one. So 2 hours on my 0 to 10 gets 10 points. And my 1 hour one might get 0 points. Now what I've done is I've made a relationship between the numbers, 2 hours, 1 hour, and how much I care about it, 0 to 10. That's what I'd be doing.
Wow. Is there anything more to this? Because I'm going to ask a couple more questions in there, but I'm like, I want to dig in and ask a little bit more about that. But at the same time, I'm like, is there a few more steps in this academic rigor process first before that I do need to weigh up?
The answer is we could talk about this for hours,
okay.
And then we could do a degree in it. But the short
well,
answer,
I don't want to do that.
we're probably at the nub of it right now.
This
great.
Really
is a key point.
Okay, fantastic. Because I'm seeing that this is something that could apply in so many different domains where I've never really considered. And I know this in many respects is going to seem a bit heartless, I think. Certainly I'm already noticing for myself, oh my God, is this heartless in what I'm about to actually see about the application of academic rigor to the decisions that we make in our relationships and who we get into relationships. I mean, I suppose that's why we have dating sites that work out all the numbers, right?
Yep,
but they clearly can't even get it right. So clearly there is an element of the people side of it, the emotional part of it. But there's a question that I then have about, so there's, especially as entrepreneurs, and today is one of those worlds where we're seeing a massive growth in purpose-based businesses.
Yeah.
And also we in this country, I don't know what the stats are in any other country, but certainly in the area of not-for-profits and non-government organisations and charitable organisations, I dare say that we've got a lot of decisions in there that we're doing it because really it's a good thing to be doing.
Yes.
And that sometimes they might not be financially viable. In fact, I know of a couple, and obviously I'm not going to name names, but that are also in a situation where they're not financially viable, but clearly there is a need because of the impact that it does have, no matter, even if it is running out of money. That's got to be a complicated issue, I imagine, especially from the weighing up of the financial numbers versus the concern of livelihood or the doing good or...
Absolutely, yeah. And that is a place that decision science can help us, because decision science considers all of those domains. It will consider the psychological, emotional domain. It will consider the economic domain. It will consider all those different domains and try to bring them into a common basis that we can make decisions from. I mentioned ages ago the idea of decision modeling, and that's what I would call a decision model. It's a way of representing all those different pieces of the decision-making puzzle so that you can make that kind of balance between, well, we need to make enough money to pay the bills, but frankly, we don't care about making any profit or any more than that. So I can trade off some of the profit I could make for doing more good. And how do I make that choice of trading off some money for more good? How do I represent more good? We turn to the decision science to say, what are ways we could represent good? And we could represent good through this scoring process that says, when I look at certain things I could do, this one has, in my opinion, twice as much good, so I give it twice the number. And that does lead me to another piece of this complex puzzle of decision science, and also the common reason why so many decisions get made with numbers that then don't feel right. One of them is because One reason is because the numbers don't allow for the fact that something might be 3 times as good as something else. Well, if it's going to be 3 times as good as something else, I need to give it a number that is 3 times as big. If I've got three numbers, high, medium, and low, I've got no way of being able to say that thing is 3 times as good. So often what happens, and I've seen this in many clients, they've said, oh, I've done all this great work, I've used all these numbers, I've added them up, here's my thing. Funnily enough, everything feels like it's as good as everything else. Why is that? Oh, yeah, you've only used 3 points to accommodate your different scores. Why not use 100 points where something that's 3 times as good can easily be allowed for? So that's a common thing that's going on, but you need the academic rigor underneath it to go, when I think about doing good versus making money, how can I compare those with each other?
So you remind me, a question, is this, that I remember using in business, balanced scorecard. Do you refer to using a balanced scorecard, or do you have your own version of it? Like, how does that?
Yeah, and one might consider a balanced scorecard is a certain type of decision model. It's a way of representing different aspects of the business in one view, where I can start to say, oh, more here, less here. How are they adding against each other? And in fact, actually, decision science is a great place to look for how to, let's say, create a rigorous, a meaningful balanced scorecard, because I'm going to be comparing different aspects of my business, and I need a common basis to do that. So decision science helps us do that.
And are there other decision models that you know of that are quite popular?
Yeah, and I'll say this right now just because I can use a 4-letter acronym.
Yes.
A common method of decision modeling that we would use is a thing called MCDA, multi-criteria decision analysis.
Ooh, that sounds fancy.
Yeah, frankly, at its heart, it is the principle of using a number of criteria, hence multi-criteria, to support my decision process. And when MCDA is used well, again, founded in good decision science, then it can really help us pick apart some of the complex problems that we're dealing with.
What's that one? Important, urgent, not important.
So that's one might call that a prioritization approach, which
Right.
is another decision model. It says, what should I be focusing my attention on? Should I be focusing my attention on the stuff that's urgent but not important? Probably not. And in fact, that's the stuff to put on one side. But the stuff that's urgent and important, that's where I should put my energy. Now, that's a good example of another. By saying, is it urgent or important? Sorry, how urgent is it and how important is it? I've now made an assessment of something that I could measure, urgency, importance, and how much I care about it. That is exactly a decision modeling technique. Again, I'd argue that's often one that's poorly used, and therefore even how you decide how urgent something is.
Yeah, how do you? Is that the fallout of that? Like, is that the...
Yes. And techniques like that are very helpful at cutting to very quick decisions. I've got
Right.
a desk full of stuff. Which ones am I going to pick up right now? But if you were then to say, are you pinning the future of your entire organization based on, I'm only going to do the important and urgent stuff, probably not suitable for that level of decision. So techniques like that, relatively straightforward kind of characterization or bucketing type approaches like that can be very helpful. I would always say, make sure it's helpful, it's sufficient for what you're trying to do. If really you are about to make $1 billion decision on the basis of a little matrix with 4 boxes in it, probably not sufficient.
So I just want to go to looking at some of the key takeouts then from today, so that certainly we can put some of these into practice and get some real action out of it. So last week we were looking really at making a big decision. And of course, those of you, if you did miss the last one, just looking at whatever a big decision that you're up against right now, what would be your key takeaway or action that you'd suggest that people look at from today?
So I'd probably 2 different things. Often people use numbers in decisions, and they've already got their own spreadsheet full of numbers. So first thing I do is go back to that spreadsheet and have a good hard look at it. When you're adding numbers up, when you're adding up your time for your commute with your house price, is that maths actually valid? So check that against the decision science. If you haven't got one of those things and you're thinking of creating one, then the first thing I'd say is, probably even at a very practical level, create 2 columns. The first column is the numbers, your commute times or whatever. The second column is a number that represents how much you care about that. So remember, separating the data from how much you care about that, and then it's the numbers you care about are the numbers you're going to add up to work out which thing wins. So separate those 2 things out from each other and think really hard about. And the other thing I think is think really hard about, are the numbers you're using to represent how much you care stuff, what we call the scores, are they sufficient to represent I care 3 times as much about this thing? So Don't just use 0, 1, and 2. Use bigger numbers that allow you to go, oh, this thing really is outstanding. I'll give it a much bigger number. That's probably my key takeaways.
Okay, great. Now, what are the actions that we want people to take from today?
So the key actions, I think, would be either look at something where you've done this already,
Yep.
test it out. Is it actually valid? Or if you haven't got something, if you don't already use that kind of thinking, then look at a key decision that you're facing, or maybe even sometimes doing this retrospectively, a decision I made before, although be cautious of making yourself upset.
Well, remembering that, I think one of the things I just want to reflect back on, at the beginning of this, we said one of the important parts of this, specifically around academic rigour, is to help us avoid making a decision that makes us feel wrong and
yes.
one which can be later turned over by somebody else. And so what I'm left with about that, Paul, is that it's getting me to a place where I feel really confident in my decision.
Yes.
And robust is the other thing that I'm hearing for myself. Like if I really feel like I've done the right kind of thinking, which you call decision science, to this, then it's like not only am I confident and not feeling like it's wrong for myself, but if I had to get challenged by somebody else about that decision, given the amount of time that I've invested in it, and as an entrepreneur with different things going on, I guess in some respects I'm almost a serial entrepreneur because I do have my fingers in many things, but I am at that point, and I'm going to bring myself into this so that at the same time I want you, as you're in this conversation, to be applying it practically, because next week we're going to come back and look at some other things to forward this conversation. But in making that decision, applying some for independently, I think there's the other thing that I noticed that you said, be careful not to weigh one comparison up to the other, but to separate them. So I'm not going to make my decision over one investment or business over something else. No, just focus in on one thing, then do the breakdown around all the considerations, and then look at the weighting of those things and make sure, and from my hearing what you're saying, make sure I'm doing a weighting that's decent enough in scale where I can get some, but it's no good having 1, 2, 3 and then everything's a 2 and you're going to go, oh, how do I go on that one, right? Is that?
Yes, that's exactly right, yeah. And I guess the other thing to say, my earlier comment about the price of your couch, is take the context into consideration. What am I currently doing? What's going on? How much money have I got in my bank account? All those things will have a bearing on how much I care about one thing compared to another.